On December 1st, the Caroline County Public Library, in partnership with the Caroline County Historic Society, had the honor of hosting distinguished guests Professor Bill Lawson and Professor Celeste-Marie Bernier. Professor Lawson is a distinguished professor of philosophy at the University of Memphis. He has taught at Spelman College, Montclair State College, West Virginia University, the University of Delaware, and Michigan State University. He teaches courses in the areas of African American philosophy and social and political philosophy. He has testified before the Congressional Subcommittee on the issue of welfare reform. Celeste is a professor of the United States and Atlantic Studies at the University of Edinburgh. She is a historian, consultant, researcher, writer to the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives and the Frederick Douglass Honor Society. She is the author and editor of a forthcoming 10-book series.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. It's almost a surprise to be here. That years ago, I would drive from Delaware to North Carolina, and instead of going down 95, I would come this way and go through the bridge, go through the tunnel. And during those years, I never thought I would be here at this spot. At this spot, giving this talk, particularly about this particular family, not person. We're going to talk about the family, not the person, Frederick Douglass, but the Douglass family. The theme for my talk tonight is going to be listening, witnessing, and carrying it on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell a story, sort of a narrative that runs alongside of the Douglass family narrative. It's a narrative of how this book came into being. In April of 2009, I found out that there was going to be a conference on Frederick Douglass, the second sojourner, in Liverpool. And I decided that I was going to go. Well, I played back and forth with that because I had to pay my own way. And I don't want to pay my way. But in the end, I decided I would go. And my wife said, go.
Always do what your wife says.
When I got there, I met this woman who, in a way, it's kind of hard to talk. We just started talking. Well, we started talking. I gave my talk first, then Celeste gave her talk. My talk was on Frederick Douglass, using Frederick Douglass as the central figure of a social and political philosophy class. When you're talking about government, you're talking about political obligation, you're talking about consent, you're talking about the treatment of people who are not full citizens. And I gave a class like that. It was probably only a few classes like that to be given in the United States, where Frederick Douglass is the major figure. Normally you talk about people like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and those people, but I always thought that Douglass needed his own class, and I taught that class. And it went well, and it was great questions. The next day, Celeste came on, and you had the idea you're glad you went first. Because when she came on, at least for me, it blew me away. I had loved Douglass. I had loved Douglass. I knew the name, but I really became familiar with Frederick Douglass when I was in Vietnam. And a sergeant this is part of the black nationalism days, and the sergeant said, if you were talking about this, you need to read someone who has really been in this struggle. And he gave me a copy of The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, which I read. And so I knew that much about Frederick Douglass. It was when I went to college, I started learning more and more about Douglass, and we were going to write a book on where we contrasted the lives of Frederick Douglass and Solomon Northup. Solomon Northup was born in the North and was kidnapped and taken to the South and held as a slave. Matter of fact, this memoir is called 12 Years a Slave. And of course, Frederick Douglass, born in the South, is going north out of slavery. And we were going to contrast those two stories as philosophers. But then we realized that we were not historians, and we had to ditch that idea. So we wrote the book, Between Slavery and Freedom, but it has a whole nother sort of theme. Talked about different terms in the Black American political experience and how those terms impact upon our appreciation of slavery and the slave experience. One of the things that we wanted to do in that text was to draw on the writings and the speeches of slaves. Most of that literature of that time, of that period, this is 1990, I guess we were looking at the 1990s. Even at that late date, people were still not drawing on the African-American slave experience to talk about slavery. And so we decided we were going to use a book that talked about the African-American, what African-Americans thought about those experiences and how they saw oppression, resistance, forgiveness, citizenship, and looking at those terms through the slave's perspective, the enslaved perspective. So then I'm standing there at this conference, and Celeste comes on and starts talking about Frederick Douglass in a way I had never heard anyone talk about Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass has served me well. As a scholar, writing on Frederick Douglass has served me well. I had a book on Frederick Douglass, I had 2 books, well, 2.5 books on Frederick Douglass, and I, was known for writing on Frederick Douglass, but here I'm in this room listening to Celeste talk about Douglass. And it struck me that we were talking about Douglass in the same way. We were talking about Douglass and the whole idea of self-presentation. How do you present yourself as a person coming out of slavery? I was talking about Douglass as a philosopher because when I read Frederick Douglass's work, when I read Frederick Douglass's work, I see the work of a philosopher. He's trying to answer a question. He talks about it in the language of a trained philosopher. And Celeste was talking about him as a performer and an artist. And when I was standing there listening to the talk, and I was just blown away. At the end of the talk, I said, I've got to talk to her. And we went up and started talking, and we talked for a little bit, and we talked later on that night at dinner, and we said, we're going to meet, and we're going to keep on talking. Little did we know that that talk would last over almost 17 years. We've been talking about Frederick Douglass for 17 years. It's kind of ironic that the first half of that talk was about Frederick Douglass. The first 7 or 8 years was about Frederick Douglass. Out of that talk came a book, Pictures and Power, where we were lucky enough to gather some of the world-renowned Douglass scholars to write about write essays on Frederick Douglass and photography. And Douglass was really, anything to do with the visual arts, Douglass was really enthralled with. He saw all the arts as a way to use them as a way to achieve freedom and to express the Black experience in a way that sort of defied and sort of negated the way Blacks were normally viewed in that period in art. And so he really wanted the art, he was really interested in art. And so part of my work is in aesthetics, and Celeste's work is in performance and in performance, not only just performance, but also in artistic framing, painting, sculptures, and those things. So we had a great time talking about that. We talked probably every month, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a month, about Douglass. That's what we talked about. Matter of fact, our conversations became known in one of the titles of the sort of little blurb, All Things Douglass. And we talked about Douglass we've been talking for 17 years. We've been talking every time we talked on the phone for hours, talking about Frederick Douglass. That's it. That's all we talk about, Frederick Douglass. Well, there was some, how you doing today, how's Andy, how's Renee, but most of it was about Douglass. Then, so, when Celeste, in a very interesting way, after we did the book on Pictures of Power, Celeste was still writing, and then Celeste started meeting all these weird people. She met Walter Evans, right, Walter Evans, who had been a collector of Frederick Douglass memorabilia, not just Frederick Douglass, but memorabilia for the family. He had scrapbooks and paintings and all stuff for the Douglass family, and he opened his house to Celeste to come in and to view the material. And he says that out of all the people who came there, Celeste was one of the only persons who came there and started seeing things in that collection that no one else had seen. And no one else had seen. During that same period of time, Celeste met Ken Mars. He met Nettie Washington Douglass, Ken's mother, who are the great, you're going to tell them, what, the great?
Great-great-great-grandson and great-great-granddaughter.
Yeah, great-great-grandson and great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington. She also told me, and the reason why I know all of this is because Celeste was telling me this, right? We were talking on the phone. We were talking on the phone. And she told me she had come to Eastern Maryland, and she met these wonderful people in Eastern Maryland who were members of the Frederick Douglass Honor Society, and she kept coming back and forth to Eastern to talk to these people. And I said, okay. One day, Celeste says, Bill, I found all this material in the Evans collection and research. Now, Celeste has been doing this research on Douglass for 30 years. I mean, she knows more about the Douglass family than probably anyone else anyone in America. So what she did was I'm going to write a biography of Anna Mary Douglass. I think that she has been totally, I don't think, she has been totally left out of this picture. There have been so many negative things said about Anna. There have been so many things, she's just been left out. And that, so I said, you got to change that. We've got to put Anna into the picture. We got to make her life known. And so she and I were talking, and so she said, will you write a foreword for this book, the biography? I said, okay, all right. That was what, about 2016, 2017. We were talking, and as she read more and more, she realized that you could not tell the family story without telling the story of the kids. Rosetta, Louis, Frederick, Charles, Annie, and the grandchildren. And so it went from one biography to this now, and we don't know how many books, it's between 10 and 13 volumes of work on the Douglass family. There's never been an undertaking of this sort that I know of in American history on a family. There's never been anyone who's taken that on as a family. And so, what was my role in all of this, right? You may ask. One of the things when we talk about listening, witnessing and carrying on, one of the things that we realized, and I have to say this from the very beginning, there was no sort of plan when we met. There was no plan. We just started talking about Douglass. There was no sort of it was a strange form of collaboration. It was a form of collaboration in which we just talked and listened to each other. And I think one of the things that really made it work was this. We both were dissatisfied with the way academia and some academia really talked about the black experience. They talked about the black experience. And when you talk to other people about that, because so many people are trained to be academics in a particular way, they do not want to hear that. And so I think one of the things that drew us together was that when we talked, we actually heard each other. We heard each other. We heard that absence. And we met someone who also felt the same way. And also felt the same way about a person we both admired, Frederick Douglass. And so we talked about Douglass. That's why we talked about Douglass all these years. My wife was, who are you on the phone with? Celeste? So it is that thing that sort of held us together and kept me involved in the project. When the book feels like it was coming into fruition, so let's say in the forward, but I realized in order to do the forward justice, I had to tell the story about how this young woman, this young white woman from the UK came to be interested in Frederick Douglass and spent all this time working on Frederick Douglass. And so, and also it was an interesting part of the story, and I thought not that interesting, how did this black man from South Philadelphia, housing projects in South Philadelphia, end up meeting this woman, right? Because in some worlds, our meeting should never have taken place. It should never have taken place. Celeste grew up in a council estate in Gloucester, England. All right? Poor family, working, really horrible, some horrible stories, life stories. I grew up in a housing project in South Philadelphia, and yet the thing that drew us together was our love of Frederick Douglass and our love of honesty. If you're going to tell a story, you have to be honest. When Celeste asked me to do the forward, I said, all right, but I realized I couldn't do the forward, right, because I could not put what she had done in 2,000 words. And Celeste says, well, and I started writing. It was really difficult to write. And Celeste says, well, you have to include yourself in the piece. And I said, include myself? All I did was listen. All I did was listen. All we did was, we just talked. And she said, well, a nice thing, so I won't go into, but, but what she did was, she not only changed my way of thinking about Douglass, and I think once you start to read these books, she'll think she's going to change your way of thinking about Frederick Douglass and the way we should do American history. One of the things that I want to point out is that Anna Mary Douglass was so essential to the life of Frederick Douglass that to leave her out is to create a historical crime. It's to create a crime. It's a crime. It is a crime. She is so valuable and so important in the life and the children. When you start reading about those children, you begin to realize how, as they call it, the kind of revolutionary collective, that they all were involved. They all were brilliant. You just read what they've done and how even Annie, who was 10 years old, was already, before she did, was already a brilliant, already a writer, already an advocate for race pride and abolition. And you said, how, it was that type of family. It was that type of family. One of the things that we did, that Celeste and I went back and forth, because Celeste wanted to show how Anna Mary Douglass was really connected and much more connected to the community than people give her credit for. And I said, the only pushback that we had was, I said, we've got to show how that worked within the family. How that worked within the family. And I'll give two quick examples. One is, all of us know, well, most of us may know, that in 1845, Frederick Douglass had to leave the country to go to England because of a fear of being returned back, captured, and taken back into slavery. When you read when I went back and I started thinking about that with Celeste's help and stuff we had read on the Douglas family, you had to rethink that whole experience, that whole period. If you read most of the historians when they talk about that, Douglas decides to go to England, he leaves Anna and the kids. When you go back and read the history, you realize that Anna was deeply involved in that decision. Douglas did not just get up and leave and go home, go to UK and leave her there. They talked about it. And so we put a scene there. You can imagine the scene in the Douglas house where the family is sitting around the table and they are talking about Douglas leaving, going to the UK and leaving his family. And I point out that the important thing that comes out of that table conversation is what? Anna says, yes, you can go, you should go. That was the thing that comes out of it. Anna says yes. There's another period when Douglas is in the UK, a number of things happen. Douglas says it's the first time he can walk around not feeling the burden of race. His status as an enslaved person has changed because he gets his freedom while he's in the UK. And thirdly, Douglas's commitment to his family and to ending slavery in America becomes stronger in the UK. They asked him to bring his family to the UK and to live there, and Douglas says no. And Douglas is planning to go home and return back to the United States. And they kept giving him more and more talks to do. You can't leave there, you gotta stay. And then Douglas tells them, my Anna says, come home, and I'm leaving in April. Which showed what? The love that this family had, the love they shared, the leaving, he was going to, Anna says, come home. Douglas says, what? I'm coming home. My Anna says, come home. It is this change in our understanding of the Douglas life and family and how they work together is what we're getting in this collection of books. And I'm happy to be a part of this series. So the second thing is about listening. I listened. We both witnessed to each other, and we're both carrying on. Matter of fact, we're still working on the Rosetta piece right now and trying to get that out. So I guess next September, that'll be part of the trilogy, part of the 3 books coming out. And I'm going to end and point out that you have a very rare opportunity tonight in that very rarely do you have a chance to meet the Douglas family. And so, Celeste, is yours.
I thought I was just going to stay seated. Bill is being very modest, and it has to be said, being in this room with you all is everything. Is everything. I spend probably 90.9% of my time in front of my computer, and I spend 90.9%, my math is terrible, unlike the mathematical genius behind me, and I spend all of my time living and breathing and sitting at the feet of Anna Murray Douglas, Frederick Douglas, Rosetta Douglas Sprague, Lewis Henry Douglas, Frederick Douglass Jr., Charles Raymond Douglas, and Annie Douglas. And at the feet of all of you, Professor Bill Lawson, Professor Renee Saunders Lawson, the Douglas Honor Society in the house, Miss Thelma Murray Nichols, Miss Deborah Murray, Miss Markia Nichols, Miss Glenda Nichols, the Murray family, the legendary family of the liberators, past, present, and future. So it is a precious gift for me to be here. You kept me alive. You all keep me alive. I don't do this out of the white supremacist Western violence that is Western academia, that has committed historical crimes and that continues to commit violence upon violence upon violence to the legendary memory of the legendary Murray family, past, present, and future, and the legendary Douglas family, past, present, and future, and all the family of legendary liberators who risked their lives to care, to love, to hold, to fight in the struggle by their side. Mr. Frederick Douglass, when he was moved, and he was the most phenomenal orator the world had ever seen, he changed US history. Anna Murray Douglass changed US history. And when he was so moved he didn't know what to say, he would say, "That cuts to here," and just point to his heart and say, "That cuts to here." So you all cut to here. I am so grateful to be here. Frederick Douglass said, "There are no people like home people. There are no people like home people." So I am so grateful. You all have been so patient and generous with me. This has taken me years. When Bill and I were first in touch, it was 1 book, then it was 2, then it was 3, then it became 7, now it's possibly 13. And a beautiful legendary liberator in Rochester said, "You're deluding yourself if you think it's 13. So I feel that it's the work that will never end and the privilege that will never end. So I just want to share a few stories today. I want to bring home to you all the Mrs. Anna Murray Douglass family legacy. Now the books are about to come. They have to come home to you first, and they have to be seen by you first. And I can exclusively share the covers too, that we have just designed and that are ready. But I'd like to begin by telling some stories. And even since I've been here in the last time, I've found more stories. There are always more stories to tell and always more stories to find. Mrs. Anna Murray Douglass was a queen. She was a freedom fighter, a revolutionary liberator. She was a political thinker. She was a brilliant strategist. She was a mathematical genius. She was a foodways specialist. She was a political radical. She was an activist. She was a social justice campaigner. She was a radical educator. And she was a philosopher of a human rights philosophy that was egalitarian in principle and practice. In her home, she had a zero tolerance for any form of prejudice. In the 19th century, she was a cutting-edge thinker about what radical equality actually meant. And her home was a space and place of black love, black joy, black excellence, black genius, and it was a command center that changed US history. She and her husband of over 44 years had a fierce love. I just had the privilege of being with Mr. Kenneth B. Morris Jr. in Scotland, and we toured all around Scotland sharing the stories. They had a fierce love for over 44 years. As Kenneth B. Morris Jr. beautifully says, they were a freedom-fighting collective. Their fierce love and their courage together changed history. Now, Professor Lawson shared with you the world that is Douglass Studies. And Douglass Studies means Frederick Douglass. What I want is a world in which when we hear Douglass, we say, which one? Which one? Are you talking about Anna Murray Douglass? Are you talking about Frederick Douglass Jr.? Are you talking about Rosetta Douglass Sprague? Now, there is a very, very famous moment in Frederick Douglass's life that I'm sure you all know, and Bill spoke about other famous moments in Frederick Douglass's life. So Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass, with their fierce, beautiful, courageous love, held on to familyhood as liberation in the fight for emancipation for their families and all families. They began their new lives, risking everything they had. As Frederick Douglass said, we had nothing, but we made everything. And they went and lived in New Bedford. And Rosetta Douglass Sprague, when Frederick Douglass was 77 years old, they went back to the same rooms, and Frederick Douglass talked her through where a towel hung on the nail, where the snowy white tablecloth with the beautiful food that Mrs. Anna Murray Douglass made brought them home. He could tell you the design of the tablecloth. This was home place. And Anna Murray Douglass, as an Underground Railroad liberator, created home for self-liberated people of all genders and ages, risking their lives on the Underground Railroad. She was a queen, and she was famous in her own time, widely known across the United States for running underground railroad networks that ran from Baltimore, Maryland, on through Rochester, on through to Canada. She was the beating heart of the liberation movement and a known civil rights leader risking her life. When Frederick Douglass is 22 years old, he gets invited to give a speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. This is a white organization. It's run by a man called William Lloyd Garrison, and it's the moment that the scholars of the Douglass, when they mean Frederick Douglass, this is the moment where they say, this made Frederick Douglass Frederick Douglass. This is where he became an international name, because he gives a speech to, it's in a town hall in Massachusetts, in New Bedford, there's about 1,000 people in that room, which was small for Frederick Douglass. He could give speeches to 40,000 at one time, but it was 1,000 people. And he said, I trembled like a leaf before this audience. I only ever associated white faces with evil and sin. I remembered Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey living the first 20 years of my life in enslavement. I remember my sisters and my brother, and I trembled that I couldn't stand. All his life to the day he died, he said it was the one speech he could never remember a word that he said because of his terror. So how did he do it? How did he stand and hold himself together as an individual who was carrying pain and suffering, and who all his life carried the memory and would honor the legacy of his ancestors? How could he speak to this thousands of white people who he associated only with evil and sin? And as he quickly knew, and as he knew before, and as everyone in this room knows, white anti-slavery activists were perpetrators of inequality, racism, and prejudice, and were in no way about the equality of the movement. And that's why Anna Murray Douglass and Frederick Douglass were their educators. Just before he died, Frederick Douglass told a friend how he did it. And this was a beautiful moment where I immediately called Kenneth B. Morris Jr. and we had a moment together about it. And then I called Bill. And I wanted to share it in this room with you. He said, I went to that town hall with the beloved love of my life, Mrs. Anna Murray Douglass. Together we entered the hall. She sat in the front row. I gave the speech to her. Anna Murray Douglass was the beloved one of Frederick Douglass's life and of his heart. That's how he described her. They had a fierce love for over 44 years, and their life together changed U.S. history. Charles Raymond Douglass, their youngest son, Nellie Washington Douglass, and Kenneth B. Morris Jr.'s ancestor, always remembered, my father's time during my childhood was not prolonged. My mother was the banker, the baker, the head of the house. Anna Murray Douglass was the children's first educator, liberator, and freedom fighter. When Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass married in the bookstore belonging to David Ruggles, and were married by world-famous liberator James W.C. Pennington, they had a marriage and a union that changed U.S. history. On their wedding day, Anna Murray Douglass, the beautiful fashion designer, the beautiful seamstress, as Bill was talking about, the beautiful artist, made herself a plum silk wedding gown. Black beauty, black glamour, black fashion, as her statement of declaration of the beauty of their marriage and the power of their marriage. All the family, all their lives, Harriet Bailey Sprague, one of Rosetta Douglass Sprague's daughters, an educator, a famous civil rights leader in her own right, kept a notebook, and in that notebook she kept a copy of the certificate of marriage between Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass, signed by James W.C. Pennington. Together, Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass are the founder members, as Bill described it, of their revolutionary liberation collective. A mother and father, and there was no better school in freedom than the Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass Family School committed to liberation. And every member of that collective gave their life to the struggle. Rosetta Douglass Sprague, Annie Douglass, Lewis Henry Douglass, Frederick Douglass Jr., and Charles Raymond Douglass. Anna Murray Douglass was the educator in the home. She sought out black radical educators and white allies who would teach and educate her children in the ways of justice. Anna Murray Douglas was a freedom fighter and a thinker in liberation, and she and her husband together sought a pathway to equality. When we hear Frederick Douglass's voice, I cannot say this enough, we are hearing Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass and the entire family's voice. They all carried that powerful oratorical style, committed to equality in reality, not in imaginaries. All the children went with starvation. All of them had not enough clothes. All of them gave their emotional support, their psychological strength, their spiritual guidance, their cooperation to everybody who needed them. And these are just the 5 biological children. Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass raised untold numbers of children who needed them, who came and lived in the home. Rosetta Douglas Sprague said, our kitchen table always had so many people at it, we had to fight to find a seat. Anna Murray Douglass was the founding mother and the educator of her children and her sons. Anna Murray Douglass isn't the most photographed citizen in the United States of the 19th century, like her husband Frederick Douglass, so we only have a few of her photographs to begin to imagine her story. But the photographs that she has taken are extremely important. This is a photograph that she has taken in Rochester, New York, in about 1868, at the same time as her daughter, so this is the same sitting, they go together, and also their famous friend, Harriet Tubman. Anna Murray Douglass was part of freedom-fighting coalitions that were world-famous, including world-famous black female and male liberators. And as Bill says, she has been ripped out of history. Frederick Douglass knew that there would be violence committed to his memory. He knew that he would be dehumanized, disrespected, and dishonored. And we all live with that knowledge to this day and the burden and pain that that causes. But he knew that his wife and his children would be annihilated and obliterated out of US history. And that's why he becomes their first historian. Anna Murray Douglass worked side by side with Ruth Ann Cox Adams, with Harriet Tubman, with Harriet Ann Jacobs, and with Sojourner Truth. And these are just a few of the people, of which there are hundreds and thousands more, who are working together on the liberation struggle. She also worked with famous black leaders such as Charles Lennox Remond, and she decided to name her youngest son, Charles Remond Douglass, in his honor. She also worked closely with William Cooper Nell, who was a strategic activist working for equal educational rights in Massachusetts, and she played a key role in the work that he was doing for equality in schools. Anna Murray Douglass also worked very closely with William Wells Brown, another very famous black liberator in the 19th century, and they had a long relationship over decades. Anna Murray Douglass was at the center of US history. She had coalitions, liberation connections, and groups that sustained a movement, and she fed, she supported, she advised. She was the leader in these organizations, and she was widely known as the leader. Powerful story to share with you today is that William Wells Brown, in honor of his close relationship with Mrs. Anna Murray Douglass, he publishes his autobiography, Narrative of William Wells Brown, and this is in the collection, the book collection, belonging to Anna Murray Douglass. And we have the beautiful words he writes there. Mrs. Anna Douglass, from her sincere friend, the author, Lynn, November 15th, 1847. Anna Murray Douglass has been standing there as the queen that she is over centuries. And why hasn't she been seen? So it's the same inequalities, violences, and injustices of white supremacy and the ways in which it works to create, deny, dehumanize black excellence, black genius, and black brilliance. On March 12, 1849, a beautiful historical moment happens in the Douglass family home in Rochester. Frederick Douglass writes a letter to one of his friends and says, "We have a new dear girl under our roof. She is doing well, and Mrs. Douglass is doing well too." Annie Douglass is born at this time on March 12, 1849, and she becomes the light and life of the family. This is the story I want to end with today. Annie Douglass lived on this earth for 10 years, 11 months, and 13 days. And in that time, she changed US history in her own right as a freedom fighter, an activist, a political thinker, and a radical. Frederick Douglass, I'm sure all of you know, keeps himself very, 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 very still in all his photographs. And it causes him severe psychological and physical pain to do so. In those earliest photographs, he's having to hold himself still in pain, as he says, to represent my ancestors. I'm not Frederick Douglass, I'm representing my ancestors and what they're going through for 20 minutes. That's how long early daguerreotypes took. Frederick Douglass, if you look closely, is moving in this picture. His hand is going across to hold his daughter. So you see his hand here is in blurred motion. Frederick Douglass's love of the beloved ones of his heart, his close relationship with all his family members, and this is the only photograph that we have of Frederick Douglass with any of his family members, and again, the reason is white supremacist violence. On June 2nd, 1872, the Ku Klux Klan fired to the ground the home you just saw, and all the family photographs are lost. Annie Douglass was a freedom fighter, an intellectual, and a liberator, and she was her mother's namesake. This mother and daughter team were very, very close all their lives. We have very few letters that Anna Murray Douglass left behind. I hope we'll find more. She was an author, she was a thinker, she wrote letters, we have some of them. And one of the most powerful letters she writes is she writes to Ruth Ann Cox Adams, self-liberated from Eastern Maryland, and her beloved sister friend. They were friends every day, all of the days over the decades of their lives. And Anna Murray Douglass appointed Ruth Ann Cox Adams as the first educator for her children. She got sick of the white supremacist violence, of the degradation and disrespect of her family and her children, and she appointed Ruth Ann Cox Adams to be the educator in the family. When it's March 11th, 1851, when Annie Douglass is 2 years old, she writes a letter to Ruth Ann Cox Adams and she says, "Annie's doing well. She now sleeps alone. All my children are doing well. I think you have a little girl called Anne. Please bring your babe. I would love you to bring your babe, and together we will have Anne and Annie." The sisterhood, the familyhood, as Jeff Donaldson in the 1960s called it in a rallying cry prior to civil rights, lives and breathes through the Douglass family. Frederick Douglass tells a story that I don't think I've ever shared here. Again, it's one that I found only recently, where he talks about his beloved daughter. Annie Douglass was very, very shy. She was also very, very tall. Rosetta Douglass Sprague said if she had lived, she would have been taller than me, her sister. She described how whenever he would have a visitor, he would be in his study in the Rochester home, and Annie Douglass would come in. She was an intellectual protege, she was an advisor, she was an intellectual thinker, but she would often come in to the room when her father was speaking with guests. One of the guests that he had was a man called Henry Ward Beecher, who was a white US anti-slavery campaigner that the Douglass family worked very closely with. And Frederick Douglass describes them sitting in the study together, and Annie Douglass comes into the room and she puts her hand on her father's knee. And Frederick Douglass said, "I turned with flame and fire to Henry Ward Beecher and I said, 'Who with a human heart could tear this child from my bosom and sell her on the auction block?' He looked at me as if he'd been struck by lightning." Annie Douglass herself was an orator, and in her 10 years, 11 months and 13 days, she herself is an important freedom fighter we need to honor and respect and worship at her feet in the freedom movement. This is one of 2 letters that survive, and she wrote many more to her father. We only have these 2, but these 2 tell us a lot about her story. In the letter that I don't show you here, she writes to Frederick Douglass, who is always on the road, and he had bleeding feet. His boots always gave him blisters and pain, and her letter starts by saying, "I hope your boots don't hurt your feet." She also writes this letter, and she tells him about her German. She was an intellectual protege in German. She was bilingual. She could write and read in German, and she says to him, I expect you'll get a letter in German from me very, very soon. She also says the German children are here, but I've gone ahead of them. She is an orator in her own right. So we need to honor and respect the legacy of this child orator who had her Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass's breathing political fire in her own veins, as Ken would beautifully say. This is a verse that she's quoting, and it's a piece of anti-slavery verse that was published by a white British anti-slavery campaigner. So she was massively well read. Rosetta Douglas Sprague, her elder sister, proudly talked about her sister's genius. And she talks to her father and she said, I have learned another piece and it is anti-slavery. I'm going to speak it in school and my piece is this. He is not the man for me who buys and sells a slave. Or he, nor he who will not set him free, but send him to his grave. But he whose noble heart beats warm for all men's life and liberty, he loves the light each human form. That's the man for me. She's 10 when she writes this. She's 10 years old. And she's reading international anti-slavery literature. She's bilingual in German. And she is commenting on anti-slavery activism. So she's the youngest anti-slavery orator. I also found out she was a leader of anti-slavery societies for children. So she was a freedom fighter working in the city of Rochester. She was helping with food. She was helping with bandages. She was helping and supporting and holding freedom seekers in the family home who stayed for weeks, months, years at a time. Annie Douglas also speaks at the bottom of this letter about John Brown. John Brown, very famously, being the white US liberator who started the war, as he described it, in capturing the arsenal in Harper's Ferry. Now again, for the scholars who see only Frederick Douglass in Douglas Studies, take the view that John Brown is in the home for a week or two. In fact, John Brown was in the home for months at a time, and at the time that he's in the home, Annie Douglas and her mother are the people in the home together with John Brown. So Annie Douglas was very much a political advisor to John Brown. And this is where she talks about John Brown. John Brown had just been executed. Poor Mr. Brown is dead. That hard-hearted man said he must die, and they took him in an open field and about a half mile from the jail and hung him. Mr. Brown is dead. That hard-hearted man said he must die, and they took him in an open field at about a half mile from the jail and hung him. Annie Douglas was devastated by the death of John Brown. She was also devastated because Anna Murray Douglas and Frederick Douglass again had to make the decision that Bill spoke about so powerfully in 1845, that Frederick Douglass had to again leave for Scotland in order to evade arrest by white racist persecutors, that ugly man, that hard-hearted man who said that John Brown had to die. The legacy and the grief of the family in the wake of Annie Douglas's struggle, Charles Raymond Douglas said, my sister, devastated by my father's sudden departure and by the death of John Brown, pined away and died. She died of congestion of the brain. This photograph I showed you at the start, I've now done the work in dating it, and the grief you see in Anna Murray Douglas and Rosetta Douglas Sprague's faces is the grief because Annie Douglas has just passed away. Anna Murray Douglas and Rosetta Douglas Sprague and all the Douglas family lived with the pain of their sister and daughter's loss. Charles Raymond Douglas said, we became a dismembered family. Rosetta Douglas Sprague writes a letter again to Ruth Ann Cox Adams, self-liberated from Easton in Maryland, and she says, I am now the only sister. My loneliness I cannot describe. I wish only my sister could be blithe and lively on this earth again, but I would not return her to the sin and suffering of this world. The poor little girl suffered very greatly before she left us. She could not see and hear. but her one last word was mother. Frederick Douglass Jr. is the reason why I can stand here today. He was a historian who honored the family legacy and kept this powerful record of his family's history. He's the person who tells us that Annie Douglass died March 13, 1860, aged 10 years, 11 months, and 13 days. And we have to deal with the violence that tore apart the Douglass family yet again. Frederick Douglass is 3,000 miles away when he gets the news that Annie Douglass has died. So Anna Murray Douglass, Rosetta Douglass Sprague, and all the sons are having to deal with the grief of the fact that their father, their husband, is 3,000 miles away. Annie Douglass dies on March 12, 1860. Her funeral is March 16, 1860. Frederick Douglass gets the news that she has died on March 31st, 1860, two weeks later. And where is he? He is in Scotland and in Ayr, in this building here. The building is still standing, and it's a church. It was a church in the 19th century, and there were 2,000 people crammed in the room who'd heard him in 1846 to hear him again. A white Scottish journalist talks about Frederick Douglass getting up to speak in front of 2,000 people, and they said he had to sit back down. They said he was eloquent, yet he was laboring under a great depression. That morning had brought the news, the tidings, the painful tidings, he told us, these are his words exactly, that the light and life of my family home had died. Frederick Douglass immediately journeys back to the United States, where he suffers injury on the ship. He has a problem with his leg caused by a fall that never leaves him, to be reunited with his family. But the pain and loss and the struggle of the family. Anna Murray Douglass is by herself, and she goes to Caroline Storeham Loguen, again, who is not respected or remembered in US history. She was the queen of the Underground Railroad in Syracuse, and her golden book of record, as it was called, that's never been found. There are numbers over 2,000 people that she aided before she died too young. She was one of Anna Murray Douglass's beloved sister friends, and Anna Murray Douglass went to her in comfort because her daughter had just died, Letitia Loguen. And Letitia Loguen was also a founder. She died at 12 years old of an anti-slavery organization that Anna Murray Douglass's daughter, Annie Douglass, was also a member of. So freedom-fighting coalitions of mothers and daughters working radically in the movement. Charles Remond Douglass remembered, as I said, we were a dismembered family. The Anna Murray and Frederick Douglass Family School had members graduating with honors in the freedom struggle. We've talked about them today. Rosetta Douglass Sprague, Annie Douglass, Lewis Henry Douglass, Frederick Douglass Jr., and Charles Remond Douglass. When Douglass Study says there can be only one, and it's Frederick Douglass, how could one person do it all? He ran 3 newspapers before the 1860s. He ran another after in Washington, D.C. He published countless books. He wrote over 7,000 letters, speeches, autobiographies, and essays. And he had the collaboration, the co-authorship, and the co-liberation work of the family members by his side. As Kenneth B. Morris Jr., as Nettie Washington Douglass says, without the family, there would be no Frederick Douglass. In recent years, a beautiful, precious moment of changing US history, Frederick Douglass's grave is a national United States monument, as I'm sure you all know, in Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester. Former director of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, Erica Mock, and Nettie Washington Douglass and Kenneth B. Morris Jr. together changed US history and changed that US monument. For over 100 years, Frederick Douglass has been resting here with his family members. But this dirt here doesn't do justice to the fact that, as their beautiful research tells us, Frederick Douglass is here. In fact, Anna Murray Douglass is here, and Annie Douglass is here. So in a beautiful commemoration ceremony, their graves and their headstones are returned to history. Douglass, Annie, 1849 to 1860, daughter. Annie was the youngest of Frederick and Anna Murray's children and the light of the family. She was an abolitionist in the making and a stellar student. She is remembered as the twinkle of her father's eye and sweet spirit. Anna Murray Douglas, 1813 to 1882, wife and mother. Wife of abolitionist Frederick Douglass and mother to his 5 children. Anna was born free and encouraged Frederick to seek his own freedom. She was a co-conductor on the Underground Railroad here in Rochester, New York. She was a prominent abolitionist and a lead in their children's education. She and Frederick were married for 44 years until her death. Anna was Frederick's personal North Star and the rock of the family. Anna Murray Douglas was a queen. My husband is enduring the minions of oppression. Why not I endure hardship that my race may be free? And I wanted to share with you today the covers of the books. So they've just been designed. And Anna Murray Douglas, there are 2 books on Anna Murray Douglas that will be coming out in September next year. And it's actually real now, so thank you for bearing with me over these years of the work. When I said it's ready and it's not ready, because Mrs. Anna Murray Douglas was not done with me yet. She wanted me to do it right, and she added. So there's been only one person who's been running my life for the last period, and that's Mrs. Anna Murray Douglas. So this is the first cover. This is the cover to Anna Murray Douglas's book, and we wanted to make sure that all the family members are always on each cover. What you can't see, because it's too bright, is that everybody's letter is behind them. So when you actually physically have the copy, you'll see this is Anna Murray Douglas's handwriting. This is her letter that I just read out, talking about Annie, her daughter, Annie Douglas, and you see her writing to Ruth Ann Cox Adams. This is Rosetta's, Douglas Sprague's book. And the books are big. They are big and long. And so the whole series is about 4 million words and 1,500 images. And we also have something else. But I had a tiny little suitcase, so I don't have many of these that I brought with me from Scotland, but we will ship them over. But I wanted you to see this. So this is a new guide that we produced on Douglas family lives. And what we want to do, the dream, is to have a plaque that honors every person in the legacy. So when Frederick Douglass is honored on a plaque, to have everybody's names included. And it opens out into Anna Murray Douglas and Frederick Douglass. And we have the beautiful words that Frederick Douglass said, that oftentimes Frederick Douglass remembered that it was this woman, his first love, who was responsible for his life. It then tells you...
One question. So how did you begin? Where did you go to college, or where did your obsession start? What was the seed?
Bill's probably better at answering that question than
Well,
me.
no, I want to know your own version. Would he know better?
There's a long version and a short version. The short version is that Britain is the white racist nation that is interested in forgetting the history of enslavement rather than honoring the legacy of liberation, black liberation across the African diaspora. I come from a Northern Irish community. My mother would tell me when I went to school, the English are lying to you, which I would tell them. That wouldn't go down well. And basically when we found Frederick Douglass, yes, they were lying to us. And so I would read Frederick Douglass, Harry and Jacob, Sojourner Truth to my mother, and it kept her alive.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
When I come back, I'm loaning it from you.
I'll stay beside you.
Come back. And none of it would have been possible without Bill.
And to your question, one of the things that she did not do, we talked over 17 years about each other's lives. And it was really a hard pulling that out of her, and she never wanted to tell a story. And one of the things that we did in there's maybe another book coming out, it's about our relationship. It was just a beautiful essay, interview I did of her, and she it's really eye-opening and just a really powerful essay about her young life and how she got to Frederick Douglass. So, yeah. So she's really been, it took me a long time. I know it was 17 years, and to find out, to get the story. So what she said to you is how she tells the story. You really have to.
One thing you didn't mention is that Anna Murray Douglas is from Denton, from this town.
Yeah.
Her family is right here.
Oh, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Celeste said that this is really, I guess, the opening south trip of these books. And she said, now that's why when I said at the beginning of my talk, I was so happy to be here because she wanted to do it here at this spot. And I was just so thankful that she felt, enough of me to ask me to come and be on the panel with her at this point in history to sort of carry forth this project. And so that's why I said at the beginning, I'm so happy to be here. Because she wouldn't do it any place else but Denton.
And being with the Murray Nichols family, to come home here and for the first time for you to see the covers, and you tell me any pointers, anything that needs to change, we'll get to it. The books are dedicated to you all, they're in honor of you all. When they exist physically, they will be coming here first. Denton and you all is the beginning of everything. And when I say you all keep me alive, it's not a metaphor. The stories and the struggles and the story that Bill got out of me, you all keep me alive in doing this work and doing it in the way committed to social justice and human rights.
When and where do we get those?
Well, I've been secretly giving out a few here. There more's coming, and I'll get them shipped to here, so that they're
To the library?
yes, so that you can pick them up. My little carry-on couldn't handle it, but they're free and they're for use in schools and to give the story of the Douglas family, so that everyone can have one. Because the books are big, and as Bill said, not everybody's going to want to be dealing with the big books. But one thing that we did too is that when Mrs. Anna Murray Douglas' book come out, it's free. So it's entirely free. So the minute it's published, it will be accessible by everybody and usable, so that there's no barriers to anyone having access to it. That's awesome. Yeah, because the print run, they can't afford. The book is enormous.
Celeste, I have something. I think in this day and age, and we're all full of wonder and questions, that it's refreshing to know the truth is there. Thank
She
you.
was standing there the whole time. Anna Murray Douglas has been standing as a queen over centuries and will forever stand as a queen over centuries. And her life and legacy that you all honor in your familyhood and your histories and your stories is the beating heart of all the purpose of everything. So I want to thank you. Being here is beautiful. Thank you. Beginning of everything.
And don't be a stranger. We're always here.
Oh, thank you.
Have cookies.
Cookies are important.
Cookies for dinner.
I'm looking at, you put up that wonderful wedding certificate signed by James.
Take them with it, then you got somebody to help with.
Clearly that speaks to the strength of their love and their marriage. But you also told us about the fire that destroyed all of the family letters. So tell us how you found it and how it survived that fire, and what that means.
That's a beautiful question, Priscilla, and the answer I would have is the answer you will have: family, family, family. I find that there's the white supremacist book learning, and then you're in the presence of the family, just what we've just been talking about, and it changes everything. If you follow the family record, the family stories, Mrs. Nettie Washington Douglas called me up and said, they're doing a statue of Mrs. Anna Mary Douglas. How tall was she? I'm thinking 5'3". She was exactly right. So the family legacy is where we all receive our education. I'm being in this room with you all, continuing to receive my education and all the new research that you're doing and finding and learning and sharing changes everything and changes how we tell the story.
Any other questions? How about which cookie are we going to eat?
Thank you all so much. Thank you.